The tall stack of papers instantly distracted the eyes of a man who had just finished stretching his muscles. That man was Michel, a private employee who works in one of the large and well-known companies in the city where he lives today. Although Michel's position is only limited to ordinary employees just like the others, there are still some employees in the place where Michel works who still feel jealous of the man. The reason is, every time the director comes down to their company to check on the performance of all of them, it is always Michel who is always praised by the director. When Michel had just taken a break, he was surprised by the arrival of the manager in his room. Moreover, the manager's gaze looked unusual at Michel. What is this data? How can you input all the numbers in there with the wrong numbers? Can't you work properly? Rio, the manager, gave Michel an unhappy look when the man made a mistake. Michel furrowed his brow. He was very sure that he had done everything well last night. No, sir, I apologize in advance, but I feel I did the best I could. Mr. Rio can double-check again, Michel suggested, which made Rio's face even less relaxed. How dare you say that to me? Huh? Snapped Rio angrily. Soon, the sound of the door opening revealed the director and James. They stepped closer to Michel's desk. So, how's James? Asked the director right in front of Michel. All done by Michel, sir. After giving the assignment, I immediately left to go home. Michel takes care of everything. James seemed to be testifying, and it made the director who heard it sigh. His gaze fell on the disappointed man who had always been his pride. With this, you are guilty of corruption. There is nothing that can make you evade. The evidence and witnesses are already there. Michel looked at his friend. However, James seemed to deliberately avert his eyes. What are you saying, James? You know yourself that I input all the data there correctly. Why are you accusing me too? Michel stared in disbelief at James. He then turned to look at Mr. Director. I swear by everything, sir, I would never be corrupt. I always want to give the best for this company. Michel tried to defend himself. He even now straightened his body. The director shook his head in disbelief. Now I want you out. Don't ever come back here again. No, sir. Please don't fire me. I've never made a mistake. I've just done what Mr. Rio told me to do. Michel tried to defend himself, but it seemed to be in vain. James delivered that stack of papers before nightfall. You should be able to finish it quickly, but you only finished at midnight. Doesn't that indicate that you intended to slow down so that you could change the amount and no one would suspect you? Michel shook his head, trying to remain defensive. James, tell Mr. Director that you gave the file late at night. Michel pleaded, looking back at James. James shook his head slowly. No, Mr. Director. Mr. Rio is right. Michel must have lied on purpose. He must have intended to commit that corruption. Michel gave James an incredulous look. James, what do you mean? Since when did you? Enough, Michel. Don't make excuses. Didn't you hear what the director said? You'd better go and pack your things. Rio cut in, not giving Michel a chance to defend himself anymore. Hearing what Rio said made Michel clench his hands into fists. His gaze looked at the man sharply, not accepting what had just been said. Michel was sure that someone was trying to set him up, and the people who did it were none other than Rio and James. Looks like you guys are working together to set me up, Michel finally said. Rio shook his head, looking displeased at Michel, who still wanted to defend himself. You're not that important, Michel, you're just... Rio immediately stopped his words when he saw Mr. Director giving instructions for him to be silent. I don't want to hear your arguments anymore, said the director, who still looked disappointed. And you, Michel? Mr. Director focused his gaze on Michel, who was now swallowing saliva. Pack your things and get out right now. Michel then sighed. It seemed that defending himself would be difficult, especially since no one was on his side. All right, I'm out now. Michel left his office feeling devastated. His thoughts were increasingly undirected, making him no longer able to distinguish between right and wrong. What should I do? Michel asked himself in a frustrated tone. Why did all this have to happen? Even James is on Mr. Rio's side. Michel ruffled his hair in frustration. He really had been stupid for trusting that jerk too much. With a grim expression and tired steps, Michel walked back to the apartment on foot. I don't know what he will tell his wife later. What is clear is that for now Michel's only destination is the apartment. Arriving at the door of his apartment, the man who was still wearing the shirt let out a long sigh several times, trying to put on a smile in front of his wife later. Then he turned the doorknob and found the living room empty. Is Elora asleep? Michel had a feeling that his wife might already be asleep. Therefore, he headed straight for their bedroom. However, as he got closer to the door, he caught the sound of laughter that he rarely heard when he was with her. Eric, please stop. Her laughter echoed loudly. I can't take it anymore. I'm ticklish. Michel's heart was beating fast. Outside the door, Michel could hear a man's voice joking with Elora. Eric? Who is Eric? Without hesitation, Michel immediately pulled the knob of the door to his room with his wife and opened the door wide. His eyes rounded perfectly when he saw two naked people on his bed. Michel. Elora was shocked when a man she recognized stood in the doorway of their room. As soon as possible, Elora grabbed whatever was beside her to cover her naked body. What are you doing, Elora? Who is this man? Fumed Michel, who would certainly never be able to accept all that. Michel's heart was completely broken. How could it not be? A disaster came twice in his life. Already this morning, Michel had to accept the fact that he had lost his permanent job. Now Michel also had to accept the new fact that his wife had a relationship with another man. One thing that makes Michel's heart hurt even more is the position of his wife's body, who is currently not wearing a single thread on her body. Without having to ask again, Michel actually already understood that they were having a relationship that they shouldn't have. This is. Elora looked all wrong. While the man named Eric immediately approached Michel after putting on his underwear and boxer briefs. She's my girlfriend. She and I intend to get married soon. So, I hope you realize yourself and your position soon. Is what this bastard says true, Elora? Have you been? Michel could not continue his words. He was too shocked by the disgusting sight before him. None of this is true, is it? Repeated Michel, staring at Elora in disbelief. Elora was seen closing her eyes for a moment, before finally nodding her head confidently. All true, she reiterated. Michel stepped back, as if he was no longer able to support himself. The man's body immediately touched the wall, as if only the wall could be used as a place for him to lean on at that time. You're crazy, Elora. How is this possible? This can't be right. Michel tried to convince himself that none of this was true. However, when the direction of his gaze looked at Elora, the woman actually nodded as if trying to convince Michel. But why, Elora? We've been together for a long time and have the same life goals. Then, why are you saying this? Why? Michel asked, emphasizing his words. By now, the man had regained his composure and stepped closer to his wife. Without thinking, Michel immediately pulled Elora's arm away from the man. However, until this moment you are still my wife. No one can touch mine, Michel exclaimed firmly, not allowing Eric to get up. Answer me, Elora. What made you make this decision? What am I lacking? Affection? Tension? Oh, I know. Economy. Isn't that right? Elora remained silent. The girl looked down as if the tiles in her apartment were much more interesting to look at. How could you decide to leave me just because of economic problems, Elora? You just need to convince your heart for me. Please don't take this decision. I promise I'll put in more effort. I'll get a job. Michel begged and pleaded with his wife. At first, Elora listened to everything so carefully until the final sentence expressed by Michel made Elora wonder. Going to look for a job? Wait a minute. What did you mean by that? Oh, or maybe. Elora shook her head. From her gaze it was clear how the woman who immediately disliked the last sentence spoken by Michel. I've just been fired for being slandered by James. I beg you, don't increase my burden. I need you. Michel pleaded that their household should not fall apart just because of a third person. I will work hard for you. Whatever you want, I promise I can buy you everything you want. Please don't leave. You're all I have. Michel begged again, but his wife quickly brushed his hand away. Let go. Don't ever touch me again. I've made this decision and I think it's the right one. It would be better for me to be with Eric, who will certainly make me happy. I'll follow what my parents say for my relationship this time. Michel frowned, wondering if all of this was also due to his in-laws' interference. Don't tell me all this has to do with. Not yet finished, Michel continued his sentence. A voice had already called him first. I was the one who asked Elora to find another man. And coincidentally, I have a close friend who has a son. So what's wrong if I match my son and my friend's son? After all parents want their children to live with the right person and have a high sense of royalty. Michel turned his body around and immediately found Elora's parents looking at the three of them. I don't know when and how they got into Michel and Elora's apartment, but one thing is for sure, they were standing right in the doorway of his room. Michel tried to discuss everything, hoping that his in-laws would be more supportive. Mom, Dad, please don't be like this. I'm her husband, Elora. I don't want to separate from her. I promise. Give me time to prove that I can make Elora happy and buy her whatever she wants. I'll make sure she won't be tormented. Michel tried to persuade. However, it was all in vain. I have more faith in Eric. He is far more worthy and comparable to Elora. If I could go back in time, I would reject your marriage in the strongest possible terms. Instead of being defended, Michel was insulted even more. His heart stung even more. From now on, you pack up all your belongings. Then, remove your feet from my daughter's apartment. Never mind the wound. Now, the wound was deliberately made even more gaping at this moment. There was a sound that came from throwing a large bag and a suitcase containing all of Michel's clothes. I've packed all your things. There's nothing left. You can leave here immediately. Elora threw all the belongings of Michel, who would soon become her ex-husband. Michel's face looked incredulously at Elora. In fact, the woman had prepared everything first. I really didn't expect you to act like this, Elora. Where are the promises you made with me? They're all gone just because of another man. Michel tidied up all his belongings. Immediately, the man walked out of the apartment that had really broken his heart. Damn it, you bastard, Michel cursed, kicking the empty can in front of his feet. Boo! The can landed perfectly on the bald head of a resident in the apartment. Wanting to hide to cover himself was also useless, because at that time Michel was in the lobby area of the parking lot, which was completely spacious and empty. Bastard! Who has the courage to kick this can? Snapped the bald man, who looked angry. Michel closed his eyes. The man's bad luck would now increase if the bald man hit him. No. It wasn't me. I didn't do it on purpose at all. Michel cupped both hands in front of his face as if begging to be forgiven. In Michel's position, who was still faithfully closing his eyes, the man waited until a slap landed on his face. However, that did not happen at all. It occurred to Michel that maybe he was already in the afterlife, because Michel felt nothing at all at that time. Yes, sir, I will do it immediately. Yes. It's okay, sir, there's just a little problem. There's a tin can that landed wherever it came from. Yes. Fine. Michel opened his eyes slowly, staring towards a point where the bald man was. A sigh of relief made Michel also rubbed his chest. His mind was even calmer when he found the square cell phone that was clearly perched on the bald man's ear. Michel's gaze continued to stare at the bald man's departure, until finally Michel really breathed a sigh of relief when the bald man was no longer in front of him. With a little sluggish, Michel pulled the suitcase and carried the fairly large bags over his shoulder. He walked with a destination that did not know where to go. If only there was someone who might be able to help him, maybe Michel would not be strapped for bags like this, especially in a city he had just entered. Michel's memory returned to Elora, the woman who had been married to him for 2 years, but preferred to be with another man. However, no matter how Michel remembers it, everything has happened and nothing can be changed anymore. In the end, Elora still follows the words of her parents, who are more supportive of living with Eric, a man who is said to be wealthy and able to meet all Elora's needs. Michel looked very sad at this time. Anyone who sees the look on his face will definitely look sorry for the man. Michel's footsteps also seemed to indicate how sluggish the man was. All eyes that looked at the man would also understand how broken the man's heart was at this time. The vehicles passing by beside him were no longer heard by Michel. There was only silence both in the man's ears and in his heart. Until when Michel had walked far enough from the apartment that left a deep wound in his heart, several voices then stood out in his ears. The man initially wanted to just ignore all the sounds. However, suddenly the man was forced to stop his footsteps. Several black sedan and Fortuner cars suddenly stopped right in front of him. Michel, who initially looked dreamy, immediately opened his eyes wide. He was surprised when it turned out that he was now surrounded by several cars at once. What's going on? Who are you guys? The man really didn't understand what had happened on that day. Michel really questioned his destiny for this time. What exactly was God trying to plan? Wasn't there enough hurt that God gave with all the chaotic things at the office and also the wife's betrayal? Are all these events not enough to hurt his heart? So now, Michel was faced with a crowd of strangers he didn't recognize like this. Slowly, as all the expensive cars were parked, making sure Michel would not be able to escape. The sound of the roaring engines was instantly lost to Michel's hearing. "Hey, what are you doing?" Michel snapped at one of the well-built and burly men. The reason is, without asking for his consent first, the burly man just took the items he was holding. "Sorry, young master. Let me carry all the things, young master." Michel furrowed his brow in confusion when he heard the word young master that the burly man had pinned on him when speaking to him. The man then chuckled amusedly as he realized how respectful the burly man was to him. "Haha, what did you say? Young master? Come on. Stop joking around just to cheer me up. I know, I'm sad and beaten down. There's no need for you to tease me like that. Give me back all my things. Quickly," Michel said firmly again, trying to reclaim his belongings. "Young master, you will understand later. I had to do all of this." Michel squinted his eyes as he shook his head lightly. "Already this person is out of his mind. I don't even know him, but he's acting like the nicest person in the world. Give me my stuff back. Damn it." Michel was adamant about what he wanted. However, the burly man did the same. Eventually, the burly man retreated with his head down. Michel became surprised. He then turned around because he felt there was someone behind him. Again, Michel was stunned by a man who was much more authoritative and handsome. The man was seen bowing as a sign of respect. That said, the man was higher in rank than the other burly men. After bowing, the man then straightened his body back up as he said, "Finally, I found you, young master," said the man looking happily at Michel. "Go home, young master. Mr. Alberto is waiting for you," he continued. Let go, damn it." Michel snapped at the burly men who seemed to be keeping a tight guard on him in the center seat of the luxurious black sedan. The look on his face seemed to give a hostile look to the men who had dared to take him without permission like this. "Calm down, young master. You are already safe. This is your rightful place." The man who said Michel was a lost heir raised his voice again, bringing his gaze to the large mansion in front of them right now. Michel, who seemed to understand the meaning of the man's gaze, then followed the direction of his gaze. Seeing the building that was so large and magnificent immediately succeeded in making Michel silenced, unable to say anything else. Michel blinked, trying to make sure that what was in front of him was certain. "Please come down, young master. Mr. Alberto has been waiting for you inside for a long time," the man then said again to take his eyes off Michel. "Alberto." Michel felt familiar with the name mentioned by the man. "If the young master wants to get all the answers, come down and join us." Michel looked frozen in place, not sure what decision to make at that moment. "All right, I'll come down with you," Michel emphasized, still in a position of self that did not fully trust the men. The burly men also seemed relieved by Michel's decision. They also invited their master to get out of the car. However, before Michel really decided to follow the words of the burly men, suddenly, Michel stopped his footsteps. He seemed to reconsider a decision that he felt was not right. "What is it, young sir?" asked the man who had been inviting Michel to dialogue from the beginning. Michel shook his head slowly with a stopped foot position, not intending to take the slightest step. Can I trust you all? Do you really have no evil intentions by selling my organs or anything? The men who were bodyguards for Michel suddenly laughed at the man's words. I don't know what they found funny at that moment. One thing was for sure, Michel still didn't understand everything that was there. I will make sure that none of that is possible. Young master is the sole heir that has been lost. We searched for you and found you to inherit what was rightfully yours. Michel stared intently at the man before him. Trying to find a lie behind his eyes, he found none. I would not lie to you, young master. Michel was forced to follow wherever the strange men took him. Just as the man who had been talking to him opened the doorknob of the huge mansion, Michel's eyes were locked in awe of the mansion in front of him. Wow! Is this a mansion? A place where rich people who have influence on the world live. Michel was stunned. He could only mutter in his heart, while continuing to wander looking at everything in the mansion. Coming from the lower class and never seeing a luxurious room in person, made Michel truly speechless. Only his eyes continued to stare and take in all the contents inside the mansion. From the beginning of the entrance, Michel was treated to a view in the form of decorative lights that were so large and made of shiny white diamonds. Even the aquarium there looked so big and wide. There was one fish that really amazed Michel at that time. The piranha fish, which is famous for its ferocity and screaming price, seemed to be provided in a separate aquarium with other beautiful ornamental fish. Michel could guess that the price of all the fish was almost hundreds of millions of rupiah. Michel's footsteps continued until his eyes stopped on an old piano that looked so antique. Not to forget, all the old wooden shelves are also there. Without saying anything, Michel then stepped his feet closer to the antiques. Young master. Yes, sir. The man who originally wanted to admonish Michel not to go into a room that consisted of many antiques immediately stopped his sentence when a hand touched his arm. Leave it alone. Everything here is also his. The man nodded, letting Michel walk as he pleased. Michel touched the antique piano that still seemed to be working. His footsteps took him along the black plates with the record player that still seemed to be working. Can I turn it on? Asked Michel without taking his eyes off the antiques. Please, young master. You can turn on whichever one you want. After being given a sharp glance by the man in the strapping black suit, the man who brought Michel to the mansion then replied to Michel's line of questioning. A smile that was so wide was perfectly published on Michel's face. For a long time, the man had wanted to listen to music from the record player. Michel read every title of the record, until finally, he focused on one song that caught his attention. He is indeed what I've been looking for all this time, someone murmured when they saw Michel's choice of music, which was the favorite of their great-grandmother. The beautiful and soothing music filled the empty room. While playing the music, Michel then pulled a chair in front of the piano. His fingers expertly opened the lid of the piano. The strains that accompanied the vinyl music made anyone who heard it certainly become mesmerized. After about 5 minutes, the music and the piano toy from Michel's hand stopped simultaneously. Proc, proc, proc. Very good game. Michel seemed to flinch as he heard an unfamiliar voice cross his ears. Michel immediately got up, moving his body away from a middle-aged man who seemed to be smiling happily at him. Don't be afraid. You're safe. I only praised you, not intending to scare you. The man seemed to extend his hand. He hoped Michel would accept his hand. Michel still seemed hesitant. However, seeing the convincing face created on the man's face, made Michel slowly want to extend his hand. I know you will definitely still trust me. I really miss you, my son. The man took Michel into his warm embrace. Strangely, at that time Michel seemed to surrender and take it for granted. Until finally, after repeating his memory of the words spoken by the man, Michel suddenly moved his body away. My son? Bowed Michel with a furrowed brow. The man had a warm smile on his face. I am, Alberto, your real father. The middle-aged man who claimed to be named Alberto then said firmly that he was Michel's biological father. Michel then shook his head slowly. No, I'm not. There's no way you're my real father. That's impossible, Michel said firmly. He could not accept that sentence at all. Alberto, meanwhile, seemed to remain calm, as if he had guessed that he would find Michelle's attitude like that. I will explain everything later. For now, it's better if you just rest. You must be feeling tired after a day of endless troubles. From now on, call me Dad, because I am your biological father.
Alberto smiled.
Looking at his son with love and affection. Daniel, please take the young master to his private room. Bring all his belongings inside. Clean up and don't let him do everything by himself. The man who had engaged Michelle in conversation from the start and addressed himself as young master now seemed to be addressed by Alberto. Yes, Mr. Alberto. Daniel bowed his body as a sign of respect. Come, young master. I will escort young master to young master's room. Michelle stared fixedly at Daniel and immediately obeyed the words of the middle-aged man. Daniel is your personal assistant from today onwards. Do not hesitate to ask him for any help. Get some rest. You really need time to rest. Alberto gave Daniel the code to lead the young master to his room immediately. Daniel nodded, leading Michelle, who could only remain silent and try to understand everything that had happened there. Come, young master. Come with me. Michelle seemed to be stuck. He walked with his mind still spinning at one point. The point where a middle-aged man who suddenly claimed to be his biological father. Please come in, young master. This is your private room. All of your heavy belongings have been tidied up in there. The rest of this small bag, let me help you organize it. Michel then shifted his gaze. He looked around his room, which was really spacious. There was not a single corner that was not occupied. Everything was filled with things that looked so luxurious. There was a TV and also a sofa there. The game console that Michel had always dreamed of was also on the sofa table. Michel was dumbfounded at everything that was before his eyes at the moment. Is this a dream? Mumbled Michel, blinking his eyes repeatedly. Michel's bewilderment was palpable as he gazed around the opulent room that seemed almost unreal. The luxurious furnishings, the state-of-the-art entertainment systems, and the overall grandeur left him speechless. He ran his fingers over the velvet upholstery of the sofa, feeling the smooth texture under his fingertips, as if trying to ground himself in the reality of his surroundings. This can't be real, he muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel, standing by the doorway, watched Michel with a mixture of respect and understanding. Young master, I assure you, everything you see here is real. This is your rightful home. Michel turned to face Daniel, his expression a mix of confusion and skepticism. Why would you call me young master? And how can this all be mine? I don't even know you people. Daniel stepped forward, his demeanor calm and reassuring. I understand this must be overwhelming, but Mr. Alberto has been searching for you for a long time. He has prepared everything to make sure you feel comfortable and welcome here. If you have any questions, I am here to help you. Michel sighed, feeling the weight of the day's events pressing down on him. The betrayal by Elora, the confrontation with her parents, and now this sudden revelation of his true heritage. It was all too much to process. He rubbed his temples, trying to alleviate the headache that was beginning to form. Can you at least tell me why he thinks he's my father? Michel asked, his voice tinged with desperation. Daniel nodded, his expression serious. Mr. Alberto will explain everything to you, but it's true. He is your biological father. You were lost to him many years ago, and he's been searching for you ever since. Michel felt a lump form in his throat. Could it be true? Could the man he had always known as his father not be his real father? The thought was almost too much to bear. He felt a mix of anger, confusion, and a strange glimmer of hope. All right, Michel said finally, his voice steadying. I'll stay and hear him out, but this is all just too much right now. Daniel smiled warmly. That's understandable, young master. Please make yourself at home. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I'll leave you to rest now. With that, Daniel exited the room, leaving Michel alone with his thoughts. Michel walked over to the bed and sat down, feeling the plush mattress give under his weight. He lay back, staring up at the ornate ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. As he lay there, his mind wandered back to the events that had led him here. The image of Ellora's cold gaze as she threw his belongings out of their apartment, the cruel words of her parents, and the unexpected encounter with the bald man in the parking lot. All of it seemed like a distant nightmare now. But the reality of his new surroundings was undeniable. Could this really be a fresh start? Michel wondered aloud, his voice echoing softly in the spacious room. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to drift off to sleep, hoping that when he woke up, he would have the clarity and strength to face whatever came next. In his dreams, Michel saw glimpses of a past he couldn't fully remember, a life of privilege and comfort, of a family that loved him and a father who had never given up on finding him. As he slept, a sense of peace began to settle over him, and for the first time in a long while, Michel felt a glimmer of hope for the future. Weeks passed, and Michel gradually settled into his new life. Alberto was patient, giving him the space to adjust while subtly guiding him towards the truth. Bit by bit, Michel learned about his heritage and the reasons behind his separation from his biological family. Alberto revealed how Michel had been kidnapped as a child by a disgruntled former employee, and despite exhaustive searches, they had only recently managed to trace him back to his old life. The more Michel learned, the more his anger at the injustice grew. He began to channel this anger into a plan. Michel had always been a strategic thinker, and now he had the resources to back his ambitions. His mind kept drifting back to James, the colleague who had framed him, and Ellora and her parents, who had so callously discarded him. Revenge wasn't just a desire, it was a necessity. Michel began by diving deep into the world of business, guided by Alberto's extensive experience and resources. He learned about the power dynamics, the financial strategies, and the importance of influence. Soon, Michel was ready to make his move. Michel decided to start with James. Using the vast resources at his disposal, Michel launched a private investigation. He gathered evidence of James's corrupt activities, including his involvement in embezzlement and insider trading. Michel then anonymously tipped off the authorities and the media. The scandal exploded, and James was swiftly arrested and disgraced. Michel felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he watched the downfall of the man who had wronged him. Next, Michel turned his attention to Ellora and her parents. He discovered that Eric, the man Ellora had left him for, was heavily in debt and involved in several illegal activities. Michel strategically bought out the debts, effectively controlling Eric's financial fate. He then arranged a chance meeting with Ellora. Ellora was stunned when she saw Michel, now a wealthy and influential figure, standing before her. Michel offered Eric a way out of his financial troubles, but only if he severed ties with Ellora and publicly humiliated her. Eric, desperate and seeing no other option, agreed. The public breakup was brutal, and Ellora's reputation was shattered. Michel's final move was against Ellora's parents. Using his newfound influence, Michel orchestrated a series of business maneuvers that led to the downfall of their company. The financial ruin was swift and devastating, leaving them with nothing. With his revenge complete, Michel requested a private meeting with Ellora and her parents. They arrived at the Grand Mansion, now fully aware of Michel's true identity and power. "Why did you do this to us?" Ellora's mother demanded, her voice trembling with anger and fear. Michel looked at them with a cold, unyielding gaze. "You threw me away like I was nothing. You humiliated and betrayed me. Now you understand what it feels like to be on the receiving end." Ellora, now a shadow of her former self, looked at Michel with tears in her eyes. "We were wrong, Michel. Please, forgive us." Michel shook his head slowly. "Forgiveness is a luxury I can't afford. You taught me that." As they left the mansion, broken and defeated, Michel felt a sense of closure. He had avenged the wrongs done to him, and now he was ready to move forward. Michel stood beside Alberto, looking out over the vast estate that was now his home. "You did what you had to do," Alberto said, placing a reassuring hand on Michel's shoulder. Michel nodded. "I did, and now I can truly start anew." With the ghosts of his past laid to rest, Michel embraced his future with renewed strength and determination. He had faced betrayal and heartbreak, but he had emerged victorious, ready to build a new life on his own terms.